everyone and welcome to The Learning Ladder. Today I am going to be talking about books that I'm reading in January. Now I have set my New Year's goal of reading at least two books every month that are just purely for me, so just purely books that I want to read that interest me and for no other reason than to be entertained myself. And I have done really well this month. I've already reached my 2 and I'm on to my 3rd. So I'll tell you what it is I'm reading. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the books because I'll talk about them next month when I tell you how I found all of them. But I'll just give a bit of brief detail and I'll probably read the blurb as well. Okay, so the first book that I have read, or that was on my list to read, but I have actually read it already, is The White Queen by Philippa Gregory. I'm really on a historical fiction movement right now. I just, I don't know if it's the time of year, or I did actually get the box set really cheap from the Book People for £4 before Christmas, so that's probably encouraged me to read them, but I think it's because it's a period of history that I was never taught in school, so I'm learning new things and it's fascinating to see how my country has changed over the years. So anyway, I'll get back to the point. This tells the story of Elizabeth Woodville. Now she is of the House of Lancaster, and if you don't know about the Cousins' War then Google it. But basically the House of York and the House of Lancaster have been fighting for years over who should be king. Now she has recently lost her husband, who was fighting in one of the battles between York and Lancaster. He is now dead, and because of that she has lost all her land. So she's on her own with 2 young children and she doesn't know what to do, obviously. So she is actually descendant from a water goddess line, which is really quite interesting. I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm going to say Melancina. I'm probably butchering it, but I think it's something like Melancina, who was half woman, half mermaid, and she had powers, so she was a witch, and the descendants of her line, or of the women's side, have all inherited certain abilities, and Elizabeth is no different, which is an interesting take on it. And it starts out the book where you find her on the side of a road waiting for the King of York to ride past on his horse because she wants to plead with him to get her land back so her children will have somewhere to live and a future. So that's my little take on it at the beginning. And the blurb says, 1464, cousin is at war with cousin as the houses of York and Lancaster tear themselves apart. And Elizabeth Woodville, a young Lancastrian widow, armed only with her beauty and her steely determination, seduces and marries the charismatic warrior King Edward of York. Crowned Queen of England, surrounded by conflict, betrayal and murder, Elizabeth rises to the demands of her position, fighting tenaciously for her family's survival. Most of all, she must defend her 2 sons, who become central figures in a mystery that has confounded historians for centuries: the missing princes in the Tower. Oh, it is absolutely fascinating, this book. Set amid the turmoil and intrigue of the Wars of the Roses, this is the first of a stunning new series in which internationally best-selling author Philippa Gregory brings this extraordinary drama to vivid life through the women, beginning with Elizabeth Woodville, the White Queen. She is an amazing author, Philippa Gregory. Obviously, it's historical fictions, so it's her take of what happened, but she includes a bibliography of all the different resources and references that she researched while she was writing the book, and it's very extensive, so I do feel comfortable in that her take on it is probably quite accurate. Obviously she's done flurries here and there because I mean no one knows for sure what conversations were had between who. I have very much enjoyed it and I'll talk about it more next month, but that was one of my books on my TBR that I already actually have read now. The next book, now I didn't actually read them in order, I actually read this one first, and this is The White Princess by Philippa Gregory, and I actually read this one first because I'd watched the TV series of it and I wanted to see how accurate that was as opposed to the book. I do actually prefer the books version than the TV version, having watched them and read them both now. But The White Princess follows the daughter, Princess Elizabeth of York, Elizabeth Woodville's daughter, and she has fallen in love with a member of her own family, her uncle, and York and Lancaster are still fighting over who should be king. She is actually arranged in marriage to marry Henry Tudor, and there's a huge battle between York and Lancaster prior to that. I'm not going to say anything else about that now, but basically it's her story, her life story. It is amazing. I absolutely love this book. I'm going to read the back for you. So, somewhere beyond the shores of England, a pretender is mustering an army. He claims to be brother to the Queen and the true heir to the throne, but he is a lost boy sent into the unknown by his mother, the White Queen, or a counterfeit prince, a low-born enemy to Henry Tudor and his York princess wife. When Henry Tudor picked up the crown of England from the mud of Bosworth Field, he knew he would have to marry the princess of the rival house, Elizabeth of York, in an effort to unify a country divided by war for nearly 2 decades. But his bride was still in love with his enemy, and her mother and all the loyal house of York still dreamed of a missing heir and a triumphant return. Elizabeth faces a terrible dilemma. Can she stand by a king whose support and courage are crumbling before her eyes? How can she choose between Tudor and York, between her new husband and the boy who claims to be her beloved lost brother? The Rose of York come home at last. Oh, this is absolutely amazing. You have to read it. Anyway, this is on my TBR as well. This was not actually on my TBR because I was just planning on reading those two, but I'm already, as you can see, pretty much more than halfway through, and this is the Red Queen, and this actually follows, if you were to read it in order, follows the White Queen, and this tells the story of Margaret Beaufort, who is Henry Tudor's mother. Now this is I really didn't want to say too much about the books in this video because I wanted that to be in the next video, but it's a very, very tragic story, this woman. I absolutely despised her in the White Princess book. I thought she was a horrible woman, but as is often the case, you don't know what happens to make someone the way they are, and I'm not at all justifying the way she is, but it's actually fascinating to see both sides. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, this follows Margaret Beaufort, who is the last, at that point, she is only still a child, and she is the last heir of the House of Lancaster. So she's cousin to the king at the time, Henry VI. Now, if she doesn't marry or have a child, the Lancaster line will completely die. So her mother, when she's only 12, arranges her to be married. So she is married at 12 years old. It's absolutely horrendous. In the hopes that she'll produce an heir so the Lancaster line can continue. Now, Margaret did not want to marry. She was a very devout religious child, and I keep saying child because she was only 12 when she married. She was a devout religious child. She wanted to join a nunnery or something along those lines. She, from a very young age, thought that she was having visions from God, and she was very much in love with the story of Joan of Arc after she'd heard it from a passing soldier. So she was a very religious woman. She never wanted to marry or anything along those lines, but as was the case in those days, women had no choice, and, well, children had no choice as well, and she was forced to marry when she was only 12. So this tells the story of how she got married and obviously conceived Henry and everything else in her life up until that point and after. So I am that much of the way through, so I've only got, I think, 200 pages left. So I'll definitely finish this in January. So I'll read the back again because authors really struggle writing blurbs. I know I do. So I always think that to not read it after they probably spent hours laboriously trying to summarise their book is a travesty. So here we go. And they explain it way better than I can. 1453, heiress to the Red Rose of Lancaster, Margaret Beaufort is a strikingly poised child. Saint's knees, her stigmata, she has a fierce and unwavering sense of destiny. If not a nun, then she'll be Queen of England and sign her name Margaret Regina, Margaret R. Still a girl, Margaret is sent to a loveless marriage in remote Wales. There she gives birth to a son whom she names for the king, her cousin Henry VI of England, fast sinking into madness. Determined to put her son on England's throne regardless of the overwhelming power of the York dynasty, she sends him into exile and pledges him in marriage to the daughter of her enemy, Elizabeth Woodville. Meanwhile, devoted in her belief that her house is a true ruler of England, Margaret feigns loyalty to the unstopper King Richard III and masterminds one of the greatest rebellions of all time. So it's really interesting to see to compare both the White Queen and the Red Queen. As I said, I absolutely hated this woman reading the White Princess, and I don't like her now either, but I think it's really interesting to hear both sides of the story. So I just love these books. And my next book on my TBR is If I Stay by Gail Foreman. Now, this was, when I started reading The White Princess, I started reading this at the same time, and as you can see, I stopped because I got absolutely enthralled in The White Princess. So I'm not sure if I will finish this by the end of January. If not, I'll just carry it on to February, but it's a very quick read, not like a historical fiction at all. Now, this is, I'm convinced I've seen a movie that's similar to this, but not the movie that the film's based on, but something very similar. But anyway, basically it's about A family, one of the children in the family is a very talented musician, and this is the story about her. She is involved in a very serious car accident where both her parents die, and she and her brother are the only ones to survive but are critically injured. Now the strange thing is that when the paramedics arrive and everyone else arrives to help her, she is actually watching, as in out of her body kind of experience, watching them help her try and resuscitate her body and whisk her off in a helicopter to the hospital. So she then has to follow her body around, trying to figure a way of what's happening and how she's going to get back into her body. So it's very different than the sort of historical fiction novels that I was reading, but I do like it, and I am enjoying it, but I'm just on this historical fiction and I can't stop. So after I have finished The Red Queen, I'm going to move on to, now if I finish The Red Queen in time, I'm going to move on to The King's Curse, another Philippa Gregory novel. Now this follows Margaret Pole, who is very predominantly featured in The White Princess, and it was a character I was very fascinated with. She was maid, but, you know, lady-in-waiting, not maid as in cleaner, but lady-in-waiting to Elizabeth. They were cousins. Her brother was actually locked in the Tower because Henry Tudor was so fearful of him, the people preferring him to Henry, and therefore York would be back in power and everything else, and he was actually left in the Tower his whole childhood until he was actually murdered. It was horrible. But I was absolutely fascinated with Margaret, who in the TV series they show her that she switched allegiance from Queen Elizabeth to her, well, I guess her brother, to her brother's side, who were trying to actually get rid of Henry. But in the White Princess book it doesn't really say it like that, so it's interesting to actually see the difference, as I said, between the book and the series. I don't know which one is more accurate, so I don't know whether she did or she did not help Princess Elizabeth's brother, but I do find her a very fascinating character and I want to know more about her. So I haven't read this, so I'm just going to read you the blurb because I don't know what it's about other than what it says. So, heir to the Plantagenets, Margaret Pole is a rival claimant to the Tudor throne. Buried in a marriage to a loyal Tudor supporter, she becomes guardian to Arthur, the young Prince of Wales, and his beautiful bride, Catherine of Aragon. But her destiny is not for a life in the shadows. Tragedy throws Margaret into poverty, yet the king's death restores her to a place at young Henry the Seventh, I have to count them, court as his lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine. As the Tudor court sours, Margaret has to choose between her allegiance to the increasingly tyrannical King Henry or to her friend, his abandoned queen. And Margaret is hiding a deadly secret, that a curse was cast on the Tudor line and she's watching it come to pass. I didn't mention that, but I'll talk about that curse in my review in February. So this is going to be my next my TBR. I don't know if I'm going to finish it before the end of January because I've still got The Red Queen to finish, but if not, I'll just carry it on to February. So that is my TBR, although I did pretty much explain the majority of the books anyway. But we'll come back next month and we'll discuss how I found the books and everything else. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.